Um, Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Monday afternoon's talk as part of Love Data Week. My name is Fran Callaghan. I'm the Research Data Librarian here in Maynooth University Library. And today I'll be talking about the Irish Qualitative Data Archive, which is now administered under the auspices of Maynooth University Library. You see the subtitle here is the introduction and overview of the Irish Qualitative Data Archive. And many of you may be thinking, well, I've already had an introduction to the Irish Qualitative Data Archive many years ago. And that's because it's actually 15 years old. It's the archetypal stroppy and difficult to manage teenager. It was envisaged and born in 2008 as part of PRTLI4 funding. So many of you will remember in the early part of 2008 when there was generous funds available for these kind of projects before the second half of 2008 when there was absolutely no money for anything. It was envisioned by staff in Maynooth University Social Sciences Institute, or MUSI, specifically Professor Jane Gray and Dr. Aileen O'Carroll. It's a qualitative data archive, so many of you will be familiar with the Irish Social Sciences Data Archive, ISDA, which is hosted in UCD Library. And ISDA and the IQDA are companion archives, if I can put it like that. But whereas ISDA is concerned solely with quantitative data, i.e. numbers, IQDA is solely for the purposes of qualitative data sets. As we all know what qualitative data sets are, typically interview transcripts, recordings of interviews, oral history projects, that kind of thing. Essays, so we have a collection of children's essays, photos, pictures, anything that has a qualitative rather than quantitative dimension is welcome in IQDA. The data objects themselves are hosted on the Digital Repository of Ireland. So essentially IQDA is a collection, is a DRI collection. And we'll talk a little bit further about the DRI and what that means for IQDA in a little while. And it has a mixture of open and restricted content. So it's not an open access archive in the strictest sense because some of the content is restricted and closed. That's not to say it is entirely inaccessible. There are means for requests to be made for individual data sets that are somewhat locked down, and they can be those requests can then be managed. Here's a picture of nearly all of the data sets available on IQDA. There's 24 here. There's actually 26, but for the purposes of keeping the graphic neat, we forego 2 of them today. But you'll see a very disparate and eclectic range of disciplines covered by IQDA. We have in the top left, we've data sets related to farming, with a lot of data sets related to the abortion rights campaign and repeal the 8th. You'll see on the top row the picture of the house. That's our collection of essays by children on growing up in urban settings. And there's the Second World War and Irish Women collection. So it's a very wide-ranging spread of disciplines in IQDA. Basically, if it's qualitative data and it's from the social sciences and it needs to be archived and shared somewhere, IQDA is the place to go. The rationale for changing, I suppose, as I said, in 2008, so 15 years ago, it was designed and born in the Maynooth University Social Sciences Institute. And now, recently, we're in the process of transitioning it into the Maynooth University Library for the purposes of its administration. And the reasons for that is to ensure the long-term viability of IQDA. As I said, it's project funded, it's PRTLI4 funded. And like a lot of funded projects, they can be quite precarious in their nature and often run into ground, into the sands, or can run out of steam over time. It was decided that in order to ensure the long-term viability of IQDA, that it would be better administered under the auspices of Maynooth University Library. That enables dedicated administrative staff. So it was Professor Jane Gray and Dr. Aileen O'Carroll were responsible for the IQDA and have been for the last 15 years. But that was on top of their other duties and responsibilities, and that became quite onerous. And what we decided to do is hire dedicated staff to assist with the administration of IQDA. And to that end, we have a library assistant starting in March next month to work full-time on the IQDA. And then as part of the transition process, we decided to re-engage with MU staff, as I'm doing here, but also nationally with researchers to ensure that we continue the growth and keep the ingest of data sets, keep that going into IQDA. The handover was initiated in November 2022, so we're about 4 months in at the moment. Like a lot of discussions or projects in the Irish HE sector, Christmas can tend to knock the wind out of the sails of these discussions. But we're back on track now, and I suppose we take the opportunity at Love Data Week to kind of soft relaunch IQDA as under the auspices of Maynooth University Library. So what can IQDA do for you? When I say you, speaking specifically here to researchers and more specifically even to social sciences researchers. And it may sound obvious, but it will provide access to your archives data sets, as I said, hosted on the DRI. And many of you will be funded researchers and will have some kind of fund or mandate stipulating archiving and sharing of data sets, and this will help you tick that box. If you don't have a funder mandate, or indeed if you don't even have a funder, archiving and sharing your data sets is still considered international best practice, and it's part of being a good academic citizen. The IQDA sticks by the mantra of the open access mantra of as open as possible and as closed as necessary. So our kind of resting position almost is that data sets should be open. But as we saw earlier, we're dealing with a lot of different data sources in social sciences, and we do realize that oftentimes you're dealing with personal and very sensitive data. For instance, we've got Growing Up in Ireland, which is a longitudinal study of children in Ireland. We've got the abortion rights campaign, Repeal the Eighth. So we do realize that in certain circumstances that data sets should be somewhat restricted. You'll notice that on these tiles, on some of these tiles on the bottom right hand corner, there's a padlock symbol, and there's the data sets that are restricted. Again, as I said earlier, that doesn't mean that they're inaccessible. It just means that there needs to be some kind of a negotiation process. So basically what we'll do is we'll receive an email from the requester, and then we'll have that negotiation whereby we set out the stipulations and the restrictions on use and reuse of the data sets. And we'll ensure that we get like a signed acceptance form from the requester before we proceed to sharing those data sets. It will assign a digital object identifier, or DDOI, for your data sets. DOIs are both unique and persistent, and that's important if you're going to share data sets. Like sharing a publication, if you're going to share it, you will want to get proper attribution and credit and citation for sharing that, and if that data set or that publication is reused. So the application of a data DOI will ensure you can be credited as the original creator of the data set. It provides long-term preservation of your data. I have long-term here grayed out because we don't know exactly how long-term is. And I think long-term preservation is quite a kind of a flawed human goal to start with, and quite hubristic really to say we have long-term preservation of data. That said, the point remains, and the point is that the DRI has achieved core trust seal, which means it complies with international best practice for repositories, and does comply with all of the requirements that exist for long-term preservation of data as it stands currently. And then finally, we can assist with the ingest process. And this is, again, the rationale for hiring an IQDA administrative assistant. And this is important because the ingest process is no cakewalk. There's quite a lot to do, and it's quite an iterative process, kind of a lot of toing and froing between ourselves as the administrators and the researcher as the depositor. There's a number of tasks need to be carried out during the ingest process. We may need to do anonymization. We will have to create metadata, and we will have to decide on licensing. They're typically some of the things that put people off depositing. So what we're saying here is that we're here to assist and even lead in the process of ingesting. What do we need from you as researchers? Well, again, it may sound obvious, but we need your data sets. And once we get a data set in, that starts this iterative toing and froing process between ourselves and the depositor. And we will provide information sheets so that the researcher is making fully informed consent decisions. And we do require signed consent forms back so that the researcher depositor is fully aware of what's going to happen with their data. And we do need information on the formats and file names. You know, we will have to make sense of what's in a data set. We're not going to have the kind of insight that you as the researcher or depositor has. We will need your input in terms of the metadata. So some of the metadata is it's like a cataloging exercise, and it's not, perhaps not obvious, but straightforward. Things like the title and the creators. Where we really need your input is in what I'm going to call the quality metadata, or the qualitative metadata rather. And that's in stuff like descriptions of what the data sets are, the keywords, the subjects, the disciplines, because that's the kind of qualitative metadata that only really the researcher or the depositor can bring. We do need an element of security and encryption, particularly during the ingest phase. So what we put as a final data set into the DRI is largely fit for public consumption. During the ingest process, that won't necessarily be the case. We will be dealing with very personal and sensitive data, and it will be raw data that we're dealing with. We will need your input on access controls. We'll need to know whether you want the data set to be open or restricted. If it's restricted, what parts of it, some of it, all of it, and the reasons for the restrictions, and what criteria depositors would have to meet in order to get access to the data sets. Anonymization, again, we can help and we can even lead in terms of the techniques and the tools used for anonymization, but we will certainly need your input in terms of what needs to be anonymized, and making sure then that at some point you're happy that the data set has been fully anonymized. And I mean fully anonymized and not pseudo-anonymized. And then finally, we'll need your input on licensing and reuse, and what kind of license you'd like the data sets to be made available under. So there's a lot to do in terms of ingesting, but we are here to help. And at that point, I think I can wrap up and open it up to questions.
Thanks very much, Fran.